So thanks for the opportunity to speak today, Paddy. It certainly tops off a very exciting year of seminars hosted by yourself and all the guest speakers. Um, for those who don't know me, my name is Elaine Beare. I'm actually a PhD candidate with the UCC Cork, and this is my first paper. It has been long in the hatching, but I'm delighted to say it's actually been accepted for a conference that I'll be presenting at next week. So today is just to give you a brief overview of the paper. So it's employees' emotional reactions to digitally enabled work events. So just a bit of research background. I suppose we're all aware digital technologies are ubiquitous at this stage. We're surrounded by them, but employees can also find themselves being under a constant bombardment between emails, phones, social media, and that then in turn can lead to challenges such as work overload and even burnout. So emotions are actually an important aspect of everyday work environments, as they both influence employees' experiences and shape their behaviours. Now that's a quote going back to 2002, and I think it's even more relevant nowadays when you look at the digital always-on environment. Weiss and Crapanzano actually proposed that organisational events are proximal causes of effective reactions. And what they mean by that basically is that something will happen to an employee at work and they will have an emotional reaction to it. So my particular focus is in the digital technologies area of those work events. So my research objective with that in mind is to identify the factors that influence employees' emotional reactions to digitally enabled work events. The research method that I actually adopted for this is a scoping literature review. So rather than doing a full literature review straight off, I wanted to kind of get an idea of what was the current thinking out there and see was it worth doing an actual full in-depth literature review. So that's the scope, that's the reason for the scoping literature review in this case. So I chose the AIS basket of 8, as it's fondly known. Papers from that, conducted 5 Boolean searches, and with the result that I had 84 papers returned. Now, after reviewing the abstract to those, I ended up with a final count of 29 papers, which then formed this scoping review. Just what I picked then as a lens to actually review these papers with is the effective events theory, which is by Weiss and Crapanzano, as it was effective reactions and the work events were the two particular things I wanted to look at in the literature. So these actually, from the scoping review, even from the 29 papers, actually 7 factors I identified: emotional dissonance, support and connectedness, task technology fit, outcome beliefs, motivators, personality, task fit, work environment, changes. So they're the 7 of those. If I look at those then through taking the AET, or the effective events theory diagram, you can see then how they slot into each one. And we found a number of interesting findings by actually doing this. One, that the work environment changes can result in work events which impact on an employee's emotions and their outcome beliefs, motivation and personality, technology fit. We found, as you can see from that previous diagram, and I just go back up again, is they're all interconnected. So no one actually stands alone. Something that happens in the work environment will have a knock-on effect to work events, which then has a knock-on effect to reactions. But outcome beliefs then, which in the traditional AET model, the work attitudes would have been an outcome of effective reactions, we found that they can actually cause an effective reaction as well. So it was an interesting exercise to carry out, in that we're actually building on the AET, the original AET model. And you can just see a more of a summary there. I did find as well all of the 29 studies give very balanced views. None of them were either massively positive or massively negative. But what I did find, while they gave both the positive and negative views, very few actually named the specific emotions that were experienced. or the specific work events that cause the emotional reaction. So as I mentioned there, we refined the AET model to take account, it was basically from advances in digital technologies, I think, that make these emotional impacts even more relevant. So just summarize again there, the personality technology fit, the motivators, and the outcome beliefs were the three main ones we identified and added to build on the original AET model. Now, I will acknowledge there is limitations, obviously, because it was only a scoping review and papers were only taken from the AIS. That gave a very narrow view, but it gave us enough of an interest, and I think of enough of findings, even from the 29 papers, to warrant an actual full comprehensive literature review. And that will actually be the next step now. The future research is to actually conduct a full comprehensive literature review, moving outside AIS as well, because I think there's a lot of relevances even in different areas that not necessarily in the IS, but I think can be brought into the IS and as well as being taken out of it. So that will actually be the next steps of my presentation. And so any comments or questions?
Well done, Elaine. Nice, sharp presentation. So plenty of time for questions and answers, which is always good. So Elaine, just to, I suppose, put things in perspective, why do you feel this topic is important? Why did you select it for research?
I suppose I've always had an interest in things from the employee side of view, having had 30 years as an employee. And my previous masters had been a focus on the employee experience. And I think it was a natural progression then when I started doing the PhD and tying it in with digital technologies to see what is the impact on the employee and then more specifically their emotional reactions, because everybody has emotions. You can't always control them, but I think it's been able to identify what might cause those emotions is one of the reasonings behind this. It's a topic that I have great passion for, and certainly has made the journey worthwhile so far in what I'm finding.
Yeah, so like it's a very interesting perspective because lots of organizations just don't do emotions, you know. We talk about everything except emotions, whereas what you're finding is that emotions are really critical to people's reaction to events. And I can even see there's questions coming in here. I know Steve himself is saying this is really interesting, but and it's particularly interesting because of COVID-19. And have you any perspective maybe on, I suppose, IT enable remote work during COVID, and maybe what sort of what your findings might be able to say about what's happening in the world at the moment?
It's interesting. While I think everybody, the initial reaction is great, we can work from home. What I'm seeing in the last couple of weeks is a lot of reports coming out showing the downside of the remote working. It becomes harder to maintain that work-life balance and to actually, this is my work life and this is, because when you're doing your work from your home, there becomes a blurring or a blending. So I think the mental health, on top of the World Health Organization last year identifying burnout, I think there's going to be some very interesting findings coming out of this year. And there's definitely going to be, I suppose, the new normal is one phrase you could use for it, because it's having an impact on employees. While there are definitely positives, it gives them more flexibility. I think there's a lot more blurring going on, and even a return to work. It's keeping that human connection is harder, obviously, when your people are fully remote.
Yeah, and even that concept of blurring is really interesting, because when are you at work and when are you not at work? Because you're at home all the time now. So and I think that blurring is a big issue for lots of people trying to clearly differentiate between I'm at home, but is that work time or is it family time or is it something else time? And all that blurring in together. And I suppose technology in a way is part of the solution, but it's also part of the problem. You know, I suppose I think I remember you saying at some stage, Elaine, that technology can be very valuable in some regards, and allows maybe more flexibility in terms of being able to work at home. But it's also part of the problem because you're always on, you're always contactable from work. Any comments about that, Elaine, in general?
I suppose, yeah, it's to use Stephen's phrase earlier on, I suppose it's a bit of a paradox. Our mobile phone is our best friend, but it could also be our enemy. It's learning, I suppose, to put it down and take those breaks. I did read an interesting article last week about people project managing their personal lives. So where they actually slot in the time saying, this is when I'm going to stop. And another article actually gave advice on to even leave the house and go out and walk around the block once, so that when you come back in the door, you're physically finished work for the evening. It's just to mentally get it into the mind that you're now switching off and you're in your home zone as opposed to your work zone. Yeah. So even if it's little tips and tricks like those, I think are of benefit to people, but it's learning to put down that mobile phone, I think, is the...
Yeah, and I think, Elaine, those factors were very interesting. Was there anyone in particular that stood out that you didn't expect, or maybe you didn't, I suppose it just wasn't on your radar before you did the literature review? Anything stick out in your head?
The one actually that interested me was the personality technology fit. And it's I suppose, as it's maybe in the old days where you talked to the car when you were trying to start it 30 years ago, now you're talking to your computer, or if you're, the particular relevance of that one was regarding an online shopping assistant. But it's interesting, I've read a few papers since doing that scoping review where they're talking about getting chatbots to kind of match their personality to the person they're talking to. So that's definitely one I'm looking forward to exploring more. I think it's very exciting when you look at the world of AR and VR and AI. I think personality of the technology is going to be an interesting...
Yeah, so your research is going down very well. I can see some of the comments coming in here. Jeremy is wondering, had you a crystal ball in preempting that this was the right topic to do pre-COVID? So I suppose another comment is people maybe, I think, is it Laurie wondering, can you maybe get a copy of the slides? So feel free if you want to share your email or your LinkedIn profile with whoever there, Elaine. And also, I suppose some here is Graham saying that having witnessed some senior staff, I suppose wilty and more junior staff showing greater leadership, my first thoughts are that emotional states are key triggers to all performance. And I put in the word all just to emphasize it. Graham didn't have. So emotions are absolutely critical to performance, and yet they're things we don't address. They're things we ignore just too often. So I think the research is fantastic, Elaine. Okay.